Roy here with Rugged Badger Racing and Team Parts Badger. I have some brakes here that I got from EBC Brakes. What we're going to do is get these installed and go ahead. This is what we're going to be running for Gridlife. Now, if you've seen the previous videos, you know I'm having problems with brakes. I've been running the DTC-30s, the DTC-50s, and the BP40s. So EBC reached out, they sent me these pads, they said try the SR21s. So we're gonna put that on the car. Now he said get a heat cycle in them, but you don't have to bed them. They're just extra grabby the first heat cycle. So we're gonna get those on the car, run a heat cycle through so that the pads will be ready to go for tomorrow when we start practice. All right, so we're gonna first start by measuring. First, we're gonna check that the actual thickness, these are supposed to be 20 millimeters. They look like 20 millimeters. Get a measurement, and we got about 20 millimeters. So these are the right thickness. Now I'm gonna measure the pad, I'm gonna switch to inches, and what I'm gonna do is measure the actual pad thickness, and then that way I can measure it based on hours on the track, and then check out how much pad I'm actually burning. So let's get a measurement here. 583.
Exactly. Light, camera, action.
592, so somewhere in that territory, about a 10th difference. 590. It's hard to get an exact measurement on this like this.
Yep.
So you're 590. So we're gonna call these 590, go ahead and get these installed in the car, and then that way when we're done with the weekend, we can measure them and see how much pad we burned. Now we're back in the garage. So over the course of the weekend, we ended up with about 80 minutes of total green track time overall. Maybe not a big enough sample set to really tell from a wear perspective. Nonetheless, let me go over the brakes themselves as far as wear. Let me go over the rotor wear. I'm also going to talk about the performance of the brakes itself and how they felt as a driver. First, let me talk a little bit about EBC. So EBC sent me these pads for free, which was pretty awesome. I was talking about the issues I was having with the previous pads online. Somebody from EBC, not their marketing department, I think one of the engineers reached out and said, hey, we're going to do another run of the pads. Why don't I send you them and you can give them a try? I'm not being compensated by EBC. They haven't asked me to make a video or anything like that. I'm just going to share my feedback the best of the ability. I will say that I had already purchased PFC 08s as well as Hawk ER1s that I did not run. I ended up running the SR21 pads. Preston at EBC Brakes also stopped by at Gridlife. I had a chance to meet with him. He's the one that we connected with and sent me the pads to begin with. Now that that's out of the way, let me dive into performance. Now, before I dive into all of that, let me first say I reached out to EBC Brakes prior to running them for the event, and I asked them, hey, how do I bed these brakes in? I didn't necessarily see the instructions for that, and they said, you don't have to bed them in. You don't have to worry about it. Be careful on the first heat cycle because they're a little bit grabby, but if you get a heat cycle in them after that, you have good performance. Now, we actually went and we registered this car for the street, and one of the reasons we did that is because bedding brakes is a huge issue. Most other compounds, you really want to follow the bed-in instructions really carefully and get a full 24-hour cool down into these brake pads to make sure you have a really good surface transfer on the rotor. I would say, at least with the SR21 compound from EBC, they said that's not necessary, and I think that's a huge plus. We'll get into a little bit about the wear of the pad overall, but not having to bed your brakes, I think that's pretty cool. Now, let me recap the brake setup, and then I'll get into my feel as a driver and what I think about these pads. Now, we talked about in the previous videos, we do have brand new 3-inch brake ducting with our new brake brackets from Beyond Motorsports. We run the BroFab kit with the 11.75-inch rotor. That's a super light or super late model rotor that is pretty inexpensive. You can get those for Wilwood. You can get Coleman. Jeg sells them. They're like 45 bucks. They're really reasonably priced rotors. We get them in the 0.81-inch configuration, which you can see here. The reason we do the 0.81 is to get a little bit more clearance overall. So these pads felt really good. Now, Road America, you have some really high-speed braking zones, and I really like the modulation of the pads. I will say that they weren't as grabby, and I didn't have the tendency to lock the brakes as much with the SR21 pad. Dare I say, it was probably one of the best pads that I've driven on as it relates to the overall pedal feel and the ability to modulate the pedal. Now, if you watch the race video, you know we were fighting some rear brake bias for two reasons. One was the car is light, or I guess three reasons. One, the car is pretty light in the rear. We took a lot of weight out of the rear of the car, and we also trimmed out the wings, so we weren't running very much downforce at Road America. So that's a reason. We're also pretty softly sprung and a little high up. I think being higher up overall allows a lot more transition of weight to the front, especially as the rear lift up and the front compresses down. So those reasons, the rear would get light at 100% braking. And in the rear, we are still running the DTC-50 pads in the rear. Now, I wasn't sure exactly what pad to end up running, and I think I would swap that pad in the future because I think the overall performance of the rear pads, they were a little bit grabbier, especially at threshold braking. The rear would definitely get light. So I'd want something that pairs a little bit better with the SR21 pads here. But like I said, that modulation was great. Unlike the Wilwood BP40s, I didn't get any smell. The Hawks felt good when I ran the Hawks previously, but I gotta say, these feel better. It definitely feels like a better pad, and I was really happy with the overall performance. Another caveat to this is we were running the Falcon RT660s, where previously we were running the Nankang tire. Now, I don't know if there's a difference in longitudinal grip overall, if the RT660 is better that way. Nonetheless, I really like the feel of the SR21s. Definitely, if not one of the best pads, it's up there for sure. Now let's talk about the pad wear. I have the pads out of the car. They're in position here. They look okay. The pads themselves did get a little bit charred near the edges overall. Preston at EBC, when he stopped by, I did show him that. He said, it's not a big deal. That happens. Now, I didn't notice anything performance-wise, and definitely I didn't have fade, but I think on these edges, they did get a little hot and they started to chip. Nonetheless, I didn't feel like that had any relation to performance. Now, early in the video, we did measure these, and before we put them in the car, they measured at 0.59 inches. I just went ahead and measured them, which a much simpler way to measure them is actually right in the middle of the pad here. I can dip this down, and between the pads, I'm getting between 0.573 and 0.571 inches. I'm going to go with the 0.571 overall on these pads, which gives us 19 thousandths of pad wear. We were on the track for about 80 minutes, and when we equate that, we're looking at using about 3.2% of the overall pad life, which you see here. Now, I ran some numbers on this because I don't think it's fair to say that these will last the full 100%. First off, it's a pretty small subset. Second off, as the pad wears, it begins to burn up even faster. It just can't dissipate the heat. Let's say hypothetically I did get 100% performance. We're talking 41, 42 hours of overall pad life. I don't think that's going to happen. So it's probably closer to the 66% or even 50% range, where at 66%, I'm looking at 27 and a half hours of pad life. At 50%, I'm looking at 20.8 hours. Now, if you've seen the previous videos, you know with the Hawk pads, we were running the DTC 50 pads, the DTC 30, and the Wilwood BP40. We were nowhere close to these numbers. I believe that the SR21 pad is going to wear substantially better, maybe even twice or better than that, than those other compounds I had mentioned. So I'm pretty excited about these overall. Now, it is just some initial data. I don't know how these are going to work over the long haul, but I gotta say I'm pretty impressed with the pad wear performance combined with the overall braking feel. With some of the other pads like the ER1s, a lot of the comments that I'm getting are that is not going to be a good pad. And the PFC 08s, I think those are a really solid pad, but they're not necessarily good for wear overall. I believe their PFC 11 is a better compound. So I have to say I'm happy with the SR21s, and I'm going to be running these for the next endurance race. Now let me talk about the rotors. So for these rotors I mentioned, these are fairly inexpensive rotors. and I put them on the car when they were brand new. Now I can feel a little bit of grooves on these rotors. It definitely had wear into this rotor itself, but it looks in really good condition. Now this is a brand new rotor, and when I look at it, I don't see any issues with this rotor. It doesn't look like it's biting too hard. But even if it is, I'm not necessarily concerned about this because the rotors are frankly the cheapest part. I think even the bolts are more expensive than the rotors when you take into account the bolts, the Loctite, putting all that together. It's probably cheapest component in the braking system is going to be these rotors themselves. But nonetheless, I don't see anything excessive, but I also don't see it where the rotor's not worn at all. It is wearing down, but obviously with only 80 minutes of full track speed, I don't necessarily know how these are going to wear long term. So there you have it. My experience with the SR21 pad from EBC Brakes. Now they also sent me the SR11, and I think I'm going to work with them to find a good combo for the rear. Now we do have a separate video. We have something special for the rear. We do want to change up the rear brakes on this car. Right now we're running a Wilwood Dynapro single, which is actually a really tiny pad. It's lightweight, it works well, but I think we have something much cooler. We'll have a video on that. Nonetheless, that should open up the option to get an EBC pad. Maybe we pair this with the SR11, or maybe we also run SR21s in the rear. I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you that the Wilwood Dynapro single pad shape, EBC did not have a compatible pad for that. So nonetheless, I'm going to do some more testing, but that's it. That's my review for now. I appreciate everybody for watching. If you like this content, remember to like and subscribe below. And thank you, EBC Brakes, for sending these. I do appreciate it. Hopefully my channel can get some followers and send some business your way. It seems like you have a pretty good product overall. And if you see my videos, you definitely know I don't shy away from talking about the bad products that I've experienced, because there's nothing worse than a bad product that ends up ruining your weekend. And so far, these SR21 pads, they seem like they're legit. It seems like it's a really good pad. And now that you can't get the Rebestos ST43, maybe take a look at the SR21. If you've run these pads as well, please remember to comment below. I'd appreciate getting some additional feedback. Whatever we can do to help the community overall to make better choices and make our cars faster. Thanks for watching.